my husband said with the kind of calm that was supposed to make me feel silly for even thinking twice. Relax, my husband said. It's just a late-night project meeting with a colleague. I looked up from the couch, watched him adjust his jacket like he was heading into something important, and I gave him the answer he expected. The answer that made me seem supportive. The answer that kept the peace. Work hard, I told him. That night, I didn't ask questions. I didn't press. I didn't follow him with suspicion like a cliché. I just stayed quiet and started packing my side of the closet. Not dramatically, not angrily, methodically, like my body already knew what my mind had been too afraid to admit. Shirts folded, jeans stacked, documents gathered. My essentials moved into bags as if I were preparing for a trip I hadn't booked, but was suddenly required to take. Because 7 months of small changes had finally added up to one unmistakable truth. The next morning, when my husband reached for his laptop, like he always did first thing before work, he froze. On top of it was a folder. Inside were 50 pages of screenshots printed and organized, month by month, message by message, line by line. Evidence that didn't ask him to confess, didn't invite him to explain, didn't leave room for denial. And on top of the folder was a note. Simple, clean, final. He didn't make a sound when he saw it. Not a gasp, not a curse, not even a whispered excuse. Just silence so thick it felt like it had weight. I'm 35, and I spent 8 years with someone who taught me that silence can be louder than any accusation. This is about the night I stopped asking questions and started documenting answers. I was 35 when everything unraveled, but the foundation of my marriage had been laid years earlier, back when I still believed that commitment meant trusting someone even when your instincts whispered otherwise. My husband and I met in our late 20s through mutual friends. It wasn't dramatic or fast. We dated for 3 years before getting married, long enough that everyone around us thought we were solid. We bought a house together, built routines, talked about the future in practical terms, renovations, savings, career growth. On the outside, we looked like a partnership that worked. He worked in project management at a tech company. I worked in operations for a logistics firm. We were both busy, both driven, both used to long hours. Or at least that's what I told myself whenever his schedule started to overshadow mine. I believed in independence. I believed in not policing someone I loved. I believed that trust was something you protected by not questioning it too loudly. For years, that belief felt justified. Then, about 7 months before everything collapsed, small things began to shift. Not enough to accuse, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. He started dressing differently for work, more carefully. Clothes chosen with intention instead of convenience. He wore cologne on days he used to forget deodorant entirely. His phone was always in his hand, always face down on surfaces, always angled away from me when he typed. When the late nights started, I didn't push back. Big project, he said. Tight deadlines. I understood. I cooked dinner alone, cleaned up, went to bed while he stayed out until 10, 11, sometimes midnight. I told myself this was what supporting your spouse looked like. About 3 months later, a name started appearing more often than it should have. Trevor. Trevor and I are handling the client presentation. Trevor thinks we should restructure the timeline. Trevor's really carrying the team right now. At first, I didn't think much of it. People have work partners. People lean on colleagues during stressful periods. But the frequency bothered me. And the way he said the name, there was a softness there, a small smile he didn't seem aware of, like he was savoring something private. 2 months before the end, I borrowed his laptop while mine was updating. It was late, around 11 on a Saturday night, when a notification popped up on the screen. Can't stop thinking about earlier. When can we do that again? I stared at it for a full minute. I didn't open it, I didn't scroll, I didn't confront him. When he came back from the bathroom, I was already off the laptop, pretending to check my phone. Everything okay? He asked. Fine, I said, just checking email. That was the moment I should have spoken up. But I didn't. Part of me didn't want confirmation. Part of me hoped I was wrong. And part of me was afraid of what knowing would force me to do. Instead, I started watching. And once you really watch, it's impossible to unsee what's been there all along. Once I stopped pretending everything was fine, the pattern became impossible to ignore. He started showering the moment he came home, every single night, like it was part of a ritual he couldn't skip. His gym schedule changed too. He used to go early in the mornings before work. Now, it was 7 or 8 at night, long after dinner. at times that made no sense for someone who claimed to be exhausted. Receipts appeared in our shared email for restaurants in neighborhoods he had no business being in. When I asked casually, he'd shrug and say it was client-related, that tech culture was different, more flexible, more social. And I let it go. What hurt more than the logistics was the emotional distance. He stopped asking about my day, stopped sitting with me at dinner, choosing instead to eat quickly and disappear into his phone. When we did talk, his eyes wandered, like his body was present, but his attention had already left the room. Physical intimacy faded without explanation, not replaced by arguments or tension, just absence, the kind that makes you feel invisible while standing right next to someone. I noticed how careful he'd become with his devices. Passwords changed, notifications silenced, screens tilted away from me instinctively. Not dramatically, just enough to keep me out. I told myself I was being paranoid. 8 years together doesn't vanish overnight. People don't just throw that away. But my body knew before my mind was ready to admit it. There was a tightness in my chest every time he said Trevor's name, a sick feeling when he smiled at messages and then locked his phone. A quiet grief when I realized I was sharing a house with someone who no longer saw me as part of his inner world. I tried once, gently, to reconnect. Suggested a weekend away, dinner without phones. He said work was too busy. Promised after this project. That phrase became his favorite deflection. After this deadline. After this presentation. After this quarter. After became never. The most unsettling part was how normal everything looked from the outside. We still owned the house. Still shared schedules, still said goodnight. Friends thought we were solid. Family thought we were busy, but fine. I was the only one living inside the slow unraveling, the only one noticing that trust wasn't breaking loudly, it was dissolving quietly. I wasn't suspicious anymore. I was preparing, because when someone starts hiding their life from you, the truth isn't something you uncover by asking questions. It's something you uncover by watching what they do when they think you're not looking. And the closer I looked, the clearer it became. Something had already crossed a line. I just hadn't seen how far, yet. I didn't feel brave driving away that morning. I felt hollow, like my body was operating on instructions my heart hadn't caught up with yet. Muscle memory took over. Red lights, turns, the familiar route that suddenly felt wrong because I wasn't supposed to be leaving it alone. I drove straight to my brother's place across town. He opened the door without asking questions, took one look at my face, and stepped aside. I set my bags down in the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded, waiting for something, anything, to hit me. Nothing did. Not yet. Around 8 that morning, my brother told me my husband had already called 6 times. He sounds panicked, he said carefully. Says there's been a huge misunderstanding. There isn't, I replied. He cheated. I have proof. I'm done. He nodded once. Okay, you can stay as long as you need. By noon, my husband showed up at my office. Security called me directly. Your husband is here, they said. He says it's an emergency. Tell him I'm unavailable, I answered. If he refuses to leave, call the police. There was a pause. Are you sure? He's not my husband anymore, I said. He's someone who betrayed me. He left. That evening, he went to my parents' house. My mother called me, worried. He's here crying, she said. He says you left without explanation. Did he show you the folder? I asked. The folder? Mom, he's been having an affair for 4 months. I found the messages, documented everything, and left. He knows exactly why I'm gone. If he's crying, it's because he got caught. There was a long silence on the line. Then she said softly, Oh, I'm so sorry. What do you need from us? Just don't believe his version, I said. The truth is documented. Everything else is spin. He tried mutual friends next. Messages came in waves, some gentle, some judgmental. Marriage requires forgiveness. Everyone makes mistakes. At least hear him out. I sent the same reply to all of them. He had an affair. I have proof. I'm divorcing him. Please respect my decision. When people kept pushing, I stopped responding. The first time I cried was 2 days later, alone in my brother's guest room, staring at the ceiling fan. Not because I missed him, because I missed who I thought he was. Because 8 years doesn't disappear just because the truth shows up all at once. But even then, I didn't regret leaving. Shock faded, sadness arrived, but doubt didn't. Every time it tried, the screenshots came back into my mind. The hotel plans, the lies, the ease with which he'd written she believed it. I realized something in that quiet space between calls and messages. If I had confronted him that night, he would have lied. If I had asked questions, he would have minimized. If I had cried, he would have comforted himself. By leaving with evidence, I took away his favorite tools. That wasn't cruelty. That was self-preservation. The legal phase began faster than I expected. On Tuesday morning, the divorce papers were served. His lawyer contacted mine within hours, requesting mediation. My attorney, Patricia, laid it out plainly when she called me. He wants to negotiate. He likely wants to avoid the affair evidence becoming part of the public record. If this goes to court, it's documented. That can affect his career. I don't care about his career, I said. I know, she replied, but you should care about leverage. We can use the truth to get you out quickly and cleanly. I thought about it for a moment, about what I actually wanted. Not revenge, not humiliation, freedom, closure, control of my own timeline. I want the house, I said. I want my share of the savings. I want this finalized in 3 months or less. And I want him to sign an admission acknowledging the affair so he can't rewrite the story later. There was a pause on the line. Then Patricia said, "That last part will be hard." "Then we go to court," I answered. 2 days later, his lawyer agreed to everything. The house, the savings split, the timeline, even the written admission. Whatever speech his lawyer gave him must have been effective because suddenly he wasn't fighting anymore. He was containing damage. I never spoke to him directly. Every word passed through attorneys. That silence did something confrontation never could. It forced him to sit with the facts without the option to argue his way out of them. He still tried to reach me, once through my brother, once by showing up at my gym, waiting near the front desk like coincidence might soften me. Both times, I walked away without speaking. Not because I was afraid of what he'd say, but because I already knew. Cheaters don't confess. They negotiate. About 3 weeks into the process, I received an unexpected message. It was from Trevor's wife. Her name was Jessica. "Daniel, I don't know if you know me," the message read, "but I'm married to Trevor. Or I was. I found out about him and your husband 2 weeks ago. I hired a private investigator to confirm. I'm filing for divorce. I just wanted you to know you're not alone, and I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Thank you for telling me," I wrote. "I'm sorry you're going through this too. Neither of us deserved it." She replied quickly. "They're both blaming each other. I'm done trying to figure out who pursued who. They both chose this." A week later, we met for coffee. Not as allies, not as friends, just two women sitting across from each other, bonded by the same betrayal. "Do you ever wish you'd confronted them?" she asked. "No," I said. "Confrontation gives them space to lie, minimize, and twist reality. I took that away by leaving with proof." She nodded slowly. "That's incredibly smart and incredibly sad." "Yes," I said, "it is." The escalation didn't make things louder. It made them sharper. And once everything was in writing, once the lies were boxed in by dates, screenshots, and signatures, there was nowhere left for him to hide. The darkest moment didn't arrive with screaming or regret. It arrived late at night, when everything finally went quiet and there was no one left to perform strength for. I was alone in my brother's guest room, lights off, the hum of the house settling around me. The legal process was moving. The messages had slowed. The chaos had receded just enough to leave space for doubt to creep in. 8 years is a long time to erase in your head. I stared at the ceiling and replayed the version of my life I had believed in. The early years. The way he used to reach for my hand automatically. The plans we'd made that weren't written down anywhere but still felt real. I wondered if I had been too decisive, too cold, if walking away without a conversation made me the villain in a story I hadn't meant to write. That's the dangerous part of betrayal, not the discovery, the aftermath, when your mind tries to bargain with reality because grief wants something familiar to hold on to. I imagined confronting him that night instead of packing. I imagined tears, apologies, explanations. I imagined him telling me he felt lonely, that work had been stressful, that it just happened. I imagined counseling sessions, long talks, promises made under pressure. And for a brief moment, the idea of staying felt easier than leaving. That was the lowest point. Because I realized if I stayed, I wouldn't be choosing love. I would be choosing comfort, choosing to believe words over evidence, choosing to rebuild on a foundation that had already collapsed. The image that finally broke the spell wasn't the messages themselves. It was one line I couldn't forget. She believed it. I had believed him, trusted him, defended him to myself when my instincts warned me something was wrong. And he had written that line without hesitation. without guilt, without fear of consequences. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, not from panic, but from clarity. If I went back now, I wouldn't just be forgiving an affair. I would be teaching him that my silence was negotiable. That betrayal could be smoothed over if it was wrapped in the right explanation. I cried then, quietly, not for him, but for the version of myself who had loved honestly in a situation that didn't deserve it. For the years I'd spent believing trust alone could hold a marriage together, even when respect was gone. By morning, my eyes were swollen and my body exhausted, but the doubt had lost its grip. The darkest moment wasn't the night I found the messages. It was the moment I realized how close I came to abandoning myself just to avoid starting over. And once I understood that, there was no going back. The turning point came the next morning, quietly, without any dramatic announcement. I woke up before my alarm, stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, and realized something felt different. I wasn't waiting anymore. For weeks, maybe months, I had been bracing myself for the next explanation, the next reassurance, the next version of reality he would offer me. That morning, there was nothing to wait for. The truth had already arrived, fully formed, documented, undeniable. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the mug warming my hands. My phone was on the counter, silent. No missed calls, no messages trying to pull me back into confusion. And instead of anxiety, I felt steadiness. I thought about how carefully he had managed the overlap between his two lives, how he'd scheduled meetings, crafted explanations, chosen words that sounded reasonable enough to discourage questions. I thought about how much effort it must have taken, and how little of that effort had ever been directed toward fixing what was broken between us. That's when I understood something essential. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a pattern of choice. He hadn't cheated because something was missing. He cheated because he wanted to, because he believed he could have both comfort and excitement without consequence, because he assumed I would stay, even if I knew. Realizing that shifted everything. Later that day, Patricia called to confirm the settlement terms were moving forward smoothly. Timeline locked, assets outlined, admission drafted. As she spoke, I noticed how calm my voice sounded when I responded. There was no shaking, no second guessing, just clarity. After the call, I went back to the house for the first time since I'd left. I walked through the rooms slowly. The living room where we'd planned holidays. The kitchen where we'd argued about nothing and everything. The bedroom that no longer felt like mine. Instead of pain, I felt detachment, like I was standing in a place that belonged to a past version of myself. I opened windows, let fresh air in, not to cleanse the space, but to acknowledge that it was no longer holding me. Before leaving, I picked up one framed photo we'd never hung, a picture from years ago, both of us smiling, unaware of what was coming. I didn't tear it up, I didn't throw it away. I placed it face down in a drawer and closed it gently. That was my goodbye. The power didn't come from exposing him. It didn't come from winning negotiations. It came from choosing not to participate in a version of reality that required me to doubt what I knew. I wasn't running away. I was walking forward, without noise, without confrontation, without apology. And for the first time since this began, I felt free enough to imagine what came next. The fallout came quietly at first, then all at once, like a building settling after an earthquake. Small cracks revealing structural damage that had been there long before the ground shook. Word traveled faster than I expected. Mutual friends reached out with careful messages, trying to sound neutral while clearly choosing sides in their heads. Some asked what happened. Some said they were shocked. A few suggested I should at least hear him out, that 8 years deserved a conversation. I sent the same reply every time. He had an affair. I documented everything. I'm divorcing him. Please respect my decision. Most stopped after that. The ones who didn't revealed themselves quickly, pressing for details they didn't need, sympathy they hadn't earned. I stopped responding to them too. My parents were steady, quietly supportive. They didn't dramatize it or try to fix it. My mother asked once if I was sleeping. My father asked once if I needed help with the house logistics. Neither asked me to reconsider. My husband, on the other hand, unraveled. Through my attorney, I learned he had tried to delay the process twice, asking for extensions, claiming stress, claiming confusion. Each attempt failed. The sign and admission of the affair shut down most of his leverage. When people lie, they depend on ambiguity. Once everything is documented, there's nothing left to argue. Then came the message I hadn't expected. Trevor's wife, Jessica, reached out again to let me know she had filed for divorce officially. She told me Trevor was already spinning stories, blaming my husband, minimizing timelines, rewriting events to make himself sound less deliberate. She didn't sound angry, just tired. They're both trying to save face, she said, but there's no version of this where they look good. She was right. A few weeks later, I heard through the same social channels that my husband and Trevor had tried to continue their relationship after everything exploded. Dinners, weekend trips, the kind of defiant togetherness people use to prove the destruction was worth it. It lasted 3 weeks. Turns out secrecy feels a lot like intimacy until it has to survive daylight. By the time the divorce reached its final stages, my husband had moved out. He took his clothes, his office equipment, his carefully curated version of himself. The house felt different without him, not lighter yet, but quieter, like it was finally honest about being empty. The settlement closed exactly on the timeline I wanted. 3 months. Clean, no appeals, no surprises. The house was divided, savings split, paperwork filed. His signed admission sat neatly in the case file, impossible to erase. When the judge finalized everything, she looked at me once and said, "You handled this decisively." I nodded. That was all. I didn't feel victorious walking out of the courthouse. I felt finished. The fallout didn't destroy him. It didn't need to. It simply removed the cover from patterns he'd been hiding behind for years. And I walked away without carrying any of it with me. The divorce finalized 2 months later, exactly on the timeline I had set. No delays, no dramatic courtroom moments, just signatures, stamps, and a chapter closing with a quiet finality that felt heavier than any argument ever could. I stayed in the house. At first, that surprised even me. I thought the memories would be too much, that every room would echo with things I'd lost. But once he was gone, truly gone, the house felt different, honest, like it had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. The guest room where I slept that last night became my home office. The bedroom we once shared got new paint, new furniture, new air. I didn't erase the past out of anger. I replaced it because I was allowed to. Jessica and I stayed in touch. We weren't bonded by trauma anymore, but by healing. We met for coffee every few weeks, 2 women who had survived the same lie from different angles. She started dating again, someone she described as almost aggressively honest. We laughed about that. Honest used to scare us. Now it felt like oxygen. As for me, I didn't rush into anything. For the first time in years, I wasn't managing someone else's emotions. I wasn't decoding silences or scanning for inconsistencies. My evenings were quiet, sometimes lonely, often peaceful. I learned how much energy I'd been spending just not knowing, and how light life feels when the truth is no longer something you have to chase. Rachel, my ex-husband, tried once more to reach out after everything was done. A handwritten letter. Pages of apologies, explanations, regret. How unhappy he'd been. How Trevor had made him feel seen. How he never meant to hurt me. How he hoped one day I'd forgive him. I read it once. Then I shredded it. Not because I was angry, but because nothing in that letter was about me. It was about easing his guilt, not honoring my pain. Forgiveness doesn't require access, and closure doesn't require conversation. What I learned from all of this is simple, but it took 8 years to understand. Confrontation is overrated. People who lie will lie better when given time. They will cry, explain, minimize, and promise change. But evidence doesn't argue. Silence doesn't negotiate. And walking away with dignity leaves no room for manipulation. My husband wanted me to ask questions. He wanted me to doubt myself. He wanted me to give him the chance to rewrite the story. Instead, I gave him documentation and absence. And when he opened that folder on his laptop and saw everything laid out, line by line, month by month, without a single accusation spoken aloud, I know he understood something important. Some endings don't need words. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all, and then leave. That night, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand answers. I didn't beg for honesty. I just stopped participating in a lie. And that decision changed everything.